I want her. 3 words. And the entire room stops breathing. 3 weeks earlier, Shani Kamau's biggest problem was her economics paper. She had been sitting in the same spot in the Hanwoo University library for 4 hours, surrounded by journals she had requested through 3 different interlibrary systems because the ones she needed were always checked out by the time she got to them. This was the pattern. The students here who needed resources the least were always the ones who had already taken them. She didn't complain about it. Complaining cost energy she didn't have, and it rarely changed anything in places like this anyway. Instead, she had developed a system: request early, collect fast, guard her table like it was the last dry ground in a flood. It worked well enough. Hanwoo University was one of the most elite private institutions in South Korea. Shani had earned her place in it through 4 years of grades that left no room for argument and an application essay that her secondary school teacher in Nairobi had read twice and then sat quietly for a moment before saying, "You wrote this yourself?" She had. She always did things herself. Her scholarship was merit-based and the conditions were simple and brutal: maintain her GPA, stay out of trouble, and do not give anyone a reason to look too closely at whether a girl like her deserved to be here. She understood the assignment. She had been completing it for 3 years without incident. She lived in a small room off campus that she had found through a notice board when the university housing lottery hadn't gone her way. She cooked her own food. She tracked everyone. She called her mother in Nairobi every Sunday at the same time, and those 30 minutes were the most uncomplicated part of her week. She was not unhappy. That was the thing people sometimes assumed when they looked at her life and measured it against the lives around her. She had never wanted the things the other students here wanted. She wanted her degree. She wanted to go home someday having made her mother's sacrifice mean something. Everything else was noise. The library incident happened on a Tuesday. A third-year group had taken over the large study table near the window, the one with the best light and the most outlets, and spread their presentation materials across it with the relaxed assumption of people who had never once questioned whether a space was theirs to take. Shani had a booking for that table. She had the confirmation on her phone. She showed it to them politely. One of them, a boy whose family name was on a building 2 blocks from campus, looked at her phone and then looked at her and said they'd be done in an hour and she could have it then. She was still standing there, deciding exactly how to respond, when someone on the other side of the table said, "She has a booking. You can see the time stamp." Shani looked up. The girl sitting across from the group wasn't part of it. She had simply been close enough to hear and apparently close enough to care. She was watching the exchange with mild interest, her chin resting in one hand, the kind of beautiful that made the fluorescent library lighting feel like it was making an effort. The boy looked at her. Then back at Shani. Then he gathered his things. After they left, the girl looked at Shani and said, "You were going to handle it anyway." "Yes," Shani said. "I know. It was still taking too long." She went back to her book. That was Han Yuna. They became friends the way rare things happen, without planning, without effort, in the specific way that only works when 2 people are exactly who they actually are from the very first moment. Their friendship made no sense on paper and perfect sense in practice. Yuna was 3rd-generation wealth, the only daughter of Han Dong-hyun, chairman of Han Group, one of the largest conglomerates in the country. She had grown up in a house that got written about in magazines, attended schools where the children of politicians and executives sat beside her, and been prepared her entire life for a specific future she had never fully agreed to. She moved through elite Korea with the fluency of someone who had been trained in its language from birth: the right bow, the right name, the right silence held at the right moment. She was also, privately, exhausted by all of it. She found Shani's outsider clarity genuinely fascinating in a world where everyone around her had an agenda visible from 3 rooms away. Shani found Yuna to be a full person in a way that had nothing to do with her family name, which was something Yuna was quietly starved for. They had a late-night ramen spot near campus that stayed open until 2 in the morning. They had a shared playlist that neither of them discussed too seriously because it would have revealed too much. They had a shorthand that had developed fast and stuck, the specific economy of people who don't waste words on each other. It was a good friendship. Shani trusted very few people in Seoul and she trusted Yuna. That was still true on the night everything changed. She just hadn't understood yet what trust costs when the other person is living inside a world you don't have the full map of. The invitation came on a Thursday. Yuna appeared at Shunny's door with food she'd picked up from a place that didn't have prices on the menu and the expression she wore when she had already decided something and was now working out how to present it. Shunny let her in and waited. There was an event, Yuna said. A private dinner. Very exclusive, very boring, the kind of thing her father's circle organized twice a year where powerful men ate well and talked about nothing Yuna cared about. She had to go. She did not want to go alone. Shunny said no. Yuna said the food would be exceptional. Shunny said no again. Yuna stayed for 2 hours. She refilled Shunny's tea without asking. She made her case from 4 different angles, each one dismantling a specific objection, the way she did in the debate club she'd been captain of since her 2nd year. It'll be 2 hours. You won't have to talk to anyone. I'll be right beside you the whole time. I just need one person in that room who I actually want to be next to. On the 3rd day of this she brought Mando from the ramen place and Shunny, who had been up since 5 working on her paper and was too tired to hold the line any longer, said fine. It was just dinner. It was just 2 hours. It was just a room full of boring, important people that Yuna needed her buffer for. She said yes. The night before the event Shunny sat at her desk after everything else was done and wrote a few lines in the small journal she kept. Not for anyone. Just for herself, the habit of putting things in order before she slept. She wrote about the paper she had submitted. About the phone call with her mother on Sunday and the way her mother had laughed at something Shunny said, really laughed, which didn't happen as often as it used to. She wrote one line about tomorrow. Something small. Something that named the low unease she couldn't quite explain, the feeling that sat at the back of her chest without giving her a reason. She closed the journal. She told herself she was overthinking. She went to sleep. Yuna arrived at 6 the next evening with a dress and a garment bag and the energy of someone who had already decided the night was going to be fun. She hung it on Shunny's wardrobe door and stepped back like she was presenting something in a gallery. Shunny looked at it. Then at Yuna. This is too much. It's a dinner. You need to look like you belong there. I don't belong there. Shunny. Yuna sat on the edge of her bed with the patience of someone who had already won. 2 hours. Food. We leave. Stop being difficult. Shunny put on the dress. The car Yuna had arranged was quiet and warm and smelled like leather. The city moved past the windows in streaks of light. Yuna was talking, something about a professor who had cornered her after class, doing the voice she did when she was imitating someone pompous, and Shunny was laughing before she meant to. This was the thing about Yuna. She made the space around her easy. She always had. They were still laughing when the car turned off the main road. The change was gradual and then it wasn't. The streets got quieter. The buildings got further apart. By the time they passed through the first security gate Shunny had stopped laughing and was watching out the window with her hands still in her lap. Yuna. This doesn't look like a dinner. Yuna glanced at her. Her smile was still there but something behind it had shifted, something small that Shunny caught and filed away without fully understanding yet. It's a private venue. Rich people like their privacy, you know that. Shunny said nothing. The car stopped. A man in a dark suit opened the door. The estate in front of them was lit and enormous and completely silent in a way that large gatherings usually weren't. Shunny stepped out and felt the cold air and looked at the entrance and felt the thing in her chest, the same thing she had tried to name in her journal the night before, sharpen into something clearer. This was not just a dinner. She didn't know yet what it was. But she knew that. Yuna appeared beside her and touched her arm lightly. Stay close to me, she said. It'll be fine. They walked inside. The first thing Shunny noticed was the quiet. Not the quiet of a gathering that hadn't started yet. The quiet of a room where everyone already knew the rules and was following them. Conversations were happening, she could see mouths moving, glasses being lifted, hands gesturing, but the noise of it sat low and controlled, like something that had been turned down deliberately. The second thing she noticed was the women. There were not many of them. The room was mostly men, older, suited, the kind of men whose stillness came from never having needed to prove anything to anyone. The few women present were young and dressed expensively and standing in the specific way that told Shani they were not here because they wanted to be. They were present the way furniture is present. Placed. She stayed close to Yuna. This was always the arrangement in rooms like this, and it worked because Yuna was impossible to ignore. She moved through elite spaces with a fluency Shani had always quietly admired, knowing exactly who to acknowledge, exactly how long to hold a conversation before moving on, drawing attention the way certain things draw light, naturally and completely. When Yuna was beside her, Shani disappeared. That was not an insult. It was a relief. Disappearing was what she needed right now. She scanned the room without moving her head. No phones. She registered this slowly and then with a cold clarity she hadn't had at the door. They had been asked to leave their phones in the car. Yuna had said it was standard for private events of this kind. She had believed that. Along the back wall there were doors. Staff moved through them but guests did not. Two men stood near the main entrance, not blocking it, just present in the specific way that means the same thing. She leaned close to Yuna. What kind of event is this? Yuna's eyes moved across the room once before coming back. The boring kind. Stop worrying. That was not an answer and they both knew it. Before Shani could push further the room reorganized itself. No announcement. No direction. Guests simply moved, drifting toward the edges, clearing the center, the way a crowd moves when it already knows what comes next. A man in a tailored suit stepped forward into the space that had opened and began speaking in the measured tone of someone running a transaction, not hosting a dinner. Shani's Korean was good. 3 years of full immersion had made it good. She understood enough of what he was saying, and what she understood made the blood leave her face. She grabbed Yuna's arm. We need to leave. Yuna's jaw was tight. We can't just walk out. Why not? Yuna didn't answer. Shani looked at the entrance. The two men were still there. Still just standing. She looked at the back doors. She looked at the room full of people who were watching the suited man with the calm attention of people who had done this before. She went still. This was what she did when a situation closed around her faster than she could think her way out. She stopped moving, stopped reacting, and started watching. It had served her before. She let it serve her now. She kept her face composed and her eyes open, and she began paying attention to everything. She was doing exactly that, watching, filing, planning, when the room changed. It was not a sound. It was not an announcement. It was the specific shift that happens when something enters a space that the space was not expecting. Conversations cut off. The suited man stopped mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to recalibrate. Shani felt it before she found the source of it. He came through a side door, not the main entrance. Two men positioned themselves behind him without being told. He paused just inside the doorway and looked at the room the way someone looks at something they are deciding about, unhurried, complete, already several steps ahead of whatever came next. Beside her, Yuna went very still. Not the controlled stillness of someone comfortable. The stillness of someone who had just seen something they didn't expect. He wasn't supposed to be here, Yuna said. Barely a whisper. Shani looked at her. Then back at him. She did what she always did. She dropped her gaze. She stepped slightly behind Yuna's shoulder and let Yuna's presence do its work. She became the background. She had done it 100 times in 100 rooms and it always worked. She felt his gaze move across the room. She felt it stop. The back of her neck went cold. She looked up. He was already looking at her. Not scanning. Not passing over her on the way to something else. Looking at her with the full, settled attention of someone who had found exactly what they came for. In a room full of people who had been chosen, curated, invited, he was looking at her. She looked away. Looked back. He hadn't moved. 3 words came from somewhere near the front of the room. She would never be fully sure if he said them himself or if someone said them for him. It didn't matter. I want her. The room stopped. Her face almost broke. She felt it happen, the composure she had held all evening coming apart at the edges, and she pulled it back through sheer will. She turned to Yuna. Her eyes said everything she couldn't say out loud. Fix this. Tell them they're wrong. Say something. Yuna looked at her. And said nothing. He was already moving. The crowd parted and he walked through it, and she stood completely still because her body had decided that stillness was the only option left. He stopped in front of her. Up close he was exactly what the room had told her he was, the kind of man that power had shaped from the inside out, nothing performed, nothing softened. He looked at her like he had already made every decision and was simply here now to collect on them. His hand closed around her wrist. She looked back at Yuna one last time. Yuna's eyes were on the floor. He pulled her from the crowd gently but completely and kissed her in front of everyone. No warmth in it. No hesitation either. It was a declaration made in the only language everyone in that room spoke fluently. She belongs here now. With me. The conversation is over before it started. Her hands were shaking. The room was watching. When he pulled back he looked at her the same way he had across the room. Like he had seen the end of something and was waiting for the rest of it to arrive. You're leaving with me. She left with him. She woke up in a room that was larger than her entire apartment. For a moment she simply lay there and looked at the ceiling and let her mind assemble the night in order. The event. The room. The auction she now understood fully for what it was. Yuna's silence. His hand on her wrist. The kiss in front of everyone. She sat up. She was alone. Her borrowed dress was hanging neatly on a stand near the window. Someone had put a glass of water on the table beside the bed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window's soul was gray and early and going about its business like nothing had happened, which felt personally offensive. She got up. Tried the door. It opened. The hallway beyond it was long and quiet and expensive in the way that very old money is expensive, not loud about it, just permanent. She stood in the doorway and looked both ways and calculated. Good morning. She turned. A woman was approaching from the far end of the hall, composed, unhurried, dressed in a way that said she had been awake and working for hours already. She stopped at a respectful distance and looked at Shunny with an expression that was professional and not unkind and gave absolutely nothing away. I'm Kim Soo-ah, Mr. Seo's personal assistant. Breakfast is ready if you'd like to eat. Mr. Seo will speak with you this afternoon. Shunny looked at her steadily. I'd like to leave. Of course. A small pause. Your things from your dormitory have been arranged. The words landed carefully. Shunny heard what was underneath them. Arranged how? You won't need them for a while. Shunny held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded once and went back into the room and sat at the table by the window and ate the breakfast that was waiting there because she was going to need her energy and because showing distress in front of people who worked for him was not something she was willing to do. She ate. She looked at Seoul spread out below her. She thought. If she couldn't leave yet she would learn the room. She would learn the house. She would learn him. That was what she did in spaces that weren't built for her. She paid attention until she understood them better than the people who built them. She was still sitting at the window, turning this over, when she noticed the journal on the small table beside the breakfast tray. Her journal. Her own small worn journal from her desk in her dormitory room. Someone had gone to her room and brought it. Out of everything, clothes, documents, her laptop, someone had specifically collected a private journal that she kept in the second drawer of her desk underneath a stack of lecture notes. She picked it up. Turned it over in her hands. It looked undisturbed. She opened it slowly, checking each page against her memory. Nothing seemed read. Nothing seemed touched. But he knew it existed. That meant he had known about her life, the details of it, the texture of it, before last night. Before that room. Before those 3 words. This was not an accident. None of it was. She set the journal down carefully and looked back out at the city. The question that had been sitting at the back of everything since the moment his gaze found her across that room settled into something sharper and clearer now. Why her? Not as a panic. Not as a cry. As a question she intended to find the answer to. She was going to need everything she had. He came to find her that afternoon the way he did everything, without announcing it, without ceremony, simply appearing in the doorway of the sitting room where Suwa had settled her after breakfast. Shani was on the sofa with a book she had found on the shelf. She wasn't reading it. She was holding it because having something in her hands made her feel less exposed. When she heard him, she set it down and looked up and did not stand. He looked at the book. Then at her. Something moved behind his expression, but she couldn't name it. He sat across from her. Not beside her. Across, a deliberate distance, which she noted. You have questions, he said. One, she said. Why me? He looked at her for a long moment. The same way he had looked at her across the room at the auction. Like he was seeing something layered. Like the answer existed in multiple parts and he was deciding which ones she was ready for. That's a longer answer than you're ready for. Try me. He didn't. Not yet. Instead he told her what she was allowed to know for now, that she was not a prisoner, that she was safer here than she understood, that no harm would come to her inside this house. He said all of it in the flat, direct tone of someone who did not make promises lightly and knew she would measure him against whatever he said here. She listened. She filed everything. She did not believe all of it and she did not disbelieve all of it. When he stood to leave, she said, "The journal." He stopped. Someone brought it from my room specifically. Out of everything in that dormitory. He turned and looked at her. I want to know how long you've been watching me. A pause. Not an uncomfortable one on his side, he didn't seem to do uncomfortable. Long enough to know you'd want it with you. He left. She sat with that for a long time. The days that followed had a strange texture, tightly controlled on the outside, restless underneath. The house was large and quietly staffed and she was permitted to move through most of it freely. She tested this gradually, the way she tested everything, pushing at the edges of what was permitted to understand exactly where the walls were. The front gate was secure. The cars came and went without her in them. But inside the house she was not locked away. She could access the library, the kitchen, the long corridor of rooms that connected the east and west wings, the garden that sat behind a wall of glass at the back. She spent a lot of time in the library. The books told her things about him that he hadn't said directly, the breadth of what he had read, the specific subjects he returned to, the marginalia in some volumes written in a hand that was small and precise. History. Strategy. 3 shelves of Korean classical literature that looked genuinely read rather than decoratively placed. She adjusted her understanding of him slightly and filed the adjustment away. Suwa was present every day, efficient, pleasant, impossible to read. She answered the questions Shani asked and did not offer information she hadn't been asked for. Shani respected the professionalism of this even as it gave her nothing. She asked, on the 4th day, if she could go outside. Suwa arranged it for the following morning. A car, a driver, and Suwa herself, 3 hours in the city, a part of Seoul Shani had never reached in 3 years of living here. The old city, not the international face of it. Narrow streets and market stalls and the smell of food from open doorways and people moving through their ordinary day like ordinary days were something that still existed. She stood in the middle of it and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. At a market stall she stopped and held a small clay pot painted in colors that reminded her of Nairobi and stood there longer than she meant to. Suwa appeared beside her. Shall I buy it for you? No, Shani said. Thank you. She didn't buy it either. She just stood there for a moment and then kept walking. At a coffee shop near the edge of the market she asked Suwa quietly if she could make a phone call. There was a brief pause, a calculation happening behind Sua's composed expression, and then she produced a phone and set it on the table between them and stepped away to give her space. Shani called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring the way she always did, as if she had been nearby waiting. Shani. You're not calling on Sunday. I know. I just wanted to hear your voice. She kept her voice steady. She told her mother she was fine, that things were busy, that she had been spending time with Yuna. Her mother talked about the neighbors and a cousin's new baby and the mango tree in the yard that had finally recovered after the dry season. Ordinary things. The most precious things. Before she hung up her mother said, "You sound different." "I'm fine, Mama." A pause. "You know you can tell me things." "I know. I'll call Sunday." She ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone face down on the table. When she looked up, Suwa was watching her from across the room, not intrusively, just present. Always present. Shani picked up her coffee and drank it and looked out the window at the street. She found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. She hadn't been able to sleep and had come down for water, moving quietly through the dark house in the way she had learned to move through spaces that weren't hers, carefully, minimally, leaving no trace. The kitchen light was on low. He was sitting at the counter eating ramen from the pot, still dressed from whatever had kept him until this hour, jacket off, sleeves pushed up, looking at his phone. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She crossed to the cabinet where she had learned the glasses were kept, filled one from the tap, and stood at the counter a few feet from him and drank it. He went back to his phone. She looked at the ramen. "You have a full kitchen staff," she said. "They're asleep. You could wake them." "I could." He didn't look up. "I don't." She looked at the pot. He pushed it slightly toward her without comment. She found a fork. She had never fully adopted chopsticks at 2 in the morning, and ate some standing at the counter. They didn't talk. The quiet was not uncomfortable, which was itself surprising. She had expected everything about him to be a performance of control, a constant projection of the authority the room at the auction had arranged itself around. But here in the low kitchen light eating ramen in the middle of the night, he was just a person. A guarded, complicated, difficult person, but a person. She filed that away too. When she set the fork down, she said, without looking at him, "The journal. I need you to tell me honestly whether you read it." He was quiet for a moment. "No." She looked at him then. "You could be lying," she said. "Yes," he said. "I could be." She studied him. He met her eyes without shifting. She went back to bed and changed what she wrote in the journal from that night forward. Just in case. Yuna reached her on a Thursday through the method they had used in university when they needed to communicate something they didn't want others to see, a coded message in a format only the two of them understood, routed through a channel that looked like nothing from the outside. It said, "I'm fine. I'm so sorry. I need to explain." Shani held the message for a long time before she responded. They communicated carefully over several days. In pieces. What Yuna told her arrived in fragments, each one shifting the shape of things. Yuna had known what the event was. Not fully, she had not known Shani would be chosen, she genuinely had not expected that. But she had known it was not simply a dinner, and she had brought Shani anyway because her father had told her it would be fine, that their family's position would protect them both, that Shani would be invisible and untouched and back home before anything complicated happened. Her father had been wrong. Or he had not been wrong. Shani was beginning to understand that with Han Donghyun those two things were not always distinct. She sat with what Yuna told her the way she sat with difficult things, quietly, completely, without the relief of reacting. The grief of it was specific and sharp. Not just that she had been brought somewhere dangerous. That the person she had trusted most in soul had known, on some level, what that place was, and made a choice anyway. Yuna was still Yuna. The girl from the library who had said she was taking too long. That was real. None of that had been a performance. And it still wasn't enough. Shani didn't say that. She didn't say much. She asked careful questions and listened to the answers, and when their communication ended that evening she sat in the library with her journal and wrote nothing. Just held it in her lap. She noticed, in the days that followed, that Yuna's messages had small gaps in them. Places where the account moved too smoothly past something, where a detail was offered that answered a question she hadn't asked while leaving a different question untouched. Yuna knew more than she was saying. Shani filed this and waited. She found the photograph by accident. She had been in the library for 2 hours and was reaching for a volume on the lower shelf when a smaller book slid with it and fell open on the floor. She picked it up. A photograph was tucked inside the back cover, the kind printed on old paper, the edges soft with age. Black and white. A woman she didn't recognize, composed, direct gaze, somewhere in her 30s, standing in what looked like a hotel corridor. Shani almost put it back. Then she saw the necklace. Small. Distinctive. A specific shape she knew without having to think about it because she had looked at it in the mirror 100 times in her dormitory room. The piece her mother had pressed into her hand the morning she left Nairobi, told her to keep it close, and never once explained. She stood in the library for a long time holding the photograph. Then she put it back exactly where she had found it and went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought for a very long time before she picked up the phone Sua had given her for outgoing calls under supervision. She called her mother. "Mama," she said when she heard her voice. "I need to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth." A silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone caught off guard. The silence of someone who had been waiting for a specific conversation and had hoped for more time before it arrived. "I was afraid of this," her mother said quietly. "I hoped it would never reach you." Shani closed her eyes. "Tell me everything." The threat arrived the same week. She didn't know the details. She knew only what she could observe. The house changed its rhythm. Staff moved differently. Sua's manner remained composed, but something behind her eyes was more alert. Two men she hadn't seen before appeared in the corridor outside her room. On the third day Sua told her she would be moving to a different residence. "More comfortable," she said. Shani didn't bother pointing out that comfort was not the issue. The new residence was on the other side of the city, still inside his world, still beautiful, still a space she had not chosen. She settled into it with the same discipline she had applied to everything since the night this started. She learned the new rooms. She identified the new staff. She continued thinking. That evening Jae-won came. He stood at the window of the sitting room looking out at the city and she sat on the sofa behind him and said, "Something happened." He didn't turn around. "Yes." "Does it involve me?" A pause. "Everything involves you now." She watched the back of his head. 3 weeks ago those words from a man like this would have made her feel like a target. Now they landed differently, not with less weight, but with more complexity. She was beginning to understand that the way he spoke was precise. He did not say things he didn't mean. Which meant he was also not saying things he wasn't ready to mean yet. "I want to know what it is," she said. He turned then and looked at her. The familiar assessment, that layered, settled attention she had never quite gotten used to. "When I'm ready to tell you," he said, "I will." She held his gaze. "That's not how this works anymore." Something shifted in his expression. Faint. Gone before she could fully read it. He left without answering. But she noticed, the following morning, that Sua brought her coffee the way she had mentioned once in passing that she preferred it. Nobody had asked her to write it down. Somebody had been paying attention. She sat at the window with her coffee and thought about a man who moved the world around him with complete precision and had still, somehow, ended up standing in a kitchen at 2 in the morning eating ramen alone. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone saying, "I was afraid of this." She thought about the photograph and the necklace and the shape of something large that she could feel the edges of without yet being able to see the whole of it. She was close. She could feel that too. She opened her journal. She started writing. She asked him for the full truth on a Monday morning. Not carefully. Not with the measured patience she had been applying to everything since she arrived in his world. She walked into his study where he was working and sat down across from him and put her journal on the table between them, open to the pages she had been filling since the night her mother told her everything, and said, "I know enough now. Tell me the rest." He looked at the journal. Then at her. He closed his laptop. What followed was the longest conversation they had ever had. He spoke without the careful rationing he had applied to everything before this, not because she had broken him down, but because she had arrived at the table with enough that withholding the rest no longer served any purpose. She had done what he had not fully anticipated. She had figured out the shape of it herself. He confirmed what her mother had told her and filled in what her mother hadn't known. 26 years ago her mother, Amina Kamau, had moved through a network that connected 3 of the most powerful shadow structures in Asia and East Africa, not as muscle, not as a figure anyone would notice, but as the person who made things move cleanly and leave no trace. Documents. Money. Information. She was methodical and brilliant and completely invisible, which was exactly what made her invaluable. She had gotten out. This almost never happened. She had negotiated her exit with enough precision that the people who would have preferred to keep her had accepted the terms because the alternative was messier than they wanted. She built a different life. She had Shani. She kept her silence. But her exit had conditions attached that she had never fully settled. A specific set of documentation, evidence that mapped the internal structure of all three networks, names and accounts and agreements that had never been written anywhere else, existed in encoded form. Amina had been the one to build the encoding. She was also the only one who fully understood how to read it. The necklace she had pressed into Shani's hand the morning she left Nairobi was not just a necklace. Embedded in its clasp, in a method Amina had designed herself, was a key. Not metaphorically. A physical digital key that unlocked the documentation she had kept in cold storage for 26 years as her only real insurance. J1 had known about the documentation for years. He had not known where Amina was. He had not known about Shani until a rival faction began searching, specifically and urgently, and his intelligence network traced the necklace's location to a scholarship student at Hanwoo University who wore it every day without knowing what it was. He had gone to that auction to find her before they did. Shani listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a moment in the particular quiet that follows a large thing being said. The rival faction, she said. What do they want with the documentation? To use it. Or to destroy it. Depending on what serves them. And what do you want with it? He was quiet for a moment. To control who has access to it. And who doesn't. That's not the same as destroying it. No. Which means the people named in it are still at risk. Yes. She looked at him. Are you one of them? He met her eyes. Yes. She had already known that. It didn't change what she thought of him in the way it might have a month ago, which told her something about how much had shifted without her fully tracking it. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, careful and heavy with the specific weight of someone who had spent 26 years hoping a particular door stayed closed. She thought about Yuna's father and the family dinner and the connection between these worlds that ran deeper and older than anything she had walked into that night at the auction. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in this room at all. You chose me in front of everyone, she said. In a room full of people who do business with each other. That was deliberate. Yes. You made it impossible for anyone there to touch me without going through you. Yes. You did that before you'd spoken a single word to me. He said nothing. Which was itself an answer. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back without shifting, without performing patience, without any of the management she had watched him apply to every other interaction in his world. He simply looked at her the way he had from the beginning, like she was the only fixed point in a room full of moving things. She picked up her journal and stood. I need a few days, she said. He nodded. She left the study and did not look back. Yuna came to her on a Wednesday. J1 permitted it because Shani asked and because he had learned by now that refusing her things had a way of producing outcomes he hadn't planned for. A car brought Yuna to the residence and Shani met her in the sitting room and did not hug her when she arrived. Yuna looked different. Pulled tight in a way that her composure usually concealed but wasn't fully concealing today. She sat across from Shani and looked at her hands for a moment before she looked up. I need to tell you something, Yuna said. Then tell me. What Yuna said arrived without the gaps and smoothed over edges of their earlier communications. It came out plainly, which was the most honesty Shani had ever heard from her in a single sitting and which made it worse somehow rather than better. After the auction, after she watched Shani leave with J1, Yuna had gone home and spent 3 days in the particular fury of someone whose plan had produced results they hadn't intended. Then she had done something she could not fully explain except that it had felt, at the time, like reclaiming something. She had gone to see J1. Alone. Without telling anyone. She had used the family connection, the access that came with being Han Donghyun's daughter, to arrange a meeting and she had sat across from him and made clear what she wanted. She was not subtle about it. Yuna was many things but she had never in her life needed to be subtle about being wanted. He had listened. He had let her finish. Then he had told her, without cruelty but without softness either, that he didn't want her. That he had never wanted her. That this was not something that was going to change. Shani sat with that. And then, she said. Yuna looked at her lap. I told my parents. The family dinner had been her mother's idea, the formal kind, both families present, the kind of dinner that in their world carried the weight of a proposal without using the word. A statement of intent, an arrangement presented as a natural conclusion to a connection that already existed. Her parents had sat across from J1 and made their case with the confident ease of people who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He had said no. In front of both families. Quietly and completely. The silence that followed that, Yuna said, had been the worst silence she had ever sat inside. Shani looked at her. Yuna's face was doing the thing it did when she was holding something that was too large for the container she was trying to keep it in. And my scholarship, Shani said. Yuna closed her eyes. The scholarship interference had come through her father's office, a formal complaint routed through a donor channel that the university's board could not easily ignore. Academic irregularity, it said. A review was recommended. The kind of review that, once initiated, had a way of finding what it was looking for whether or not it existed. Shani had been sent a notification to the email address she hadn't been able to check since the night of the auction. She hadn't known. Until now. She sat very still. You did that, she said. Not a question. My father did it. Yuna stopped. I didn't tell him not to. The room was very quiet. Shani looked at the woman across from her, the girl from the library who had told a group of entitled students that she was taking too long, who had made the ramen spot feel like home, who had laughed with her in the back of a car an hour before the worst night of her life. She looked at her and felt the full, complicated weight of what it was to love someone and find out they had limits you hadn't known about. Limits that had cost you something real. I have nothing, Shani said quietly. Do you understand that? I came here with nothing. The scholarship is everything I built. Everything my mother made possible. And you let your father threaten it because he rejected you. Shani. You have everything. Her voice was still level. Still controlled. You have always had everything. I have never once begrudged you that. I was happy for you. I was proud to be your friend. And you looked at the one thing I had that you didn't, the one thing, and you tried to take it. Yuna's eyes were bright. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. Yuna's voice broke slightly. I just couldn't understand why it was you. You weren't supposed to be chosen. You weren't supposed to be the one I've known him my whole life. Our families. So it was never about me, Shani said. It was about the fact that you lost. That's not. Can't you just be happy for me? The words came out with the full weight of everything underneath them. You have everything, Yuna. Everything. Your family, your name, your future handed to you in both hands. Can't you just let me have this? Something cracked open in Yuna's expression. And what came through it was ugly and honest and completely unguarded, the thing she had been carrying beneath every polished surface. No, Yuna said. Her voice was very quiet and very certain. No, because I will always be above you. That is just how it is. That is how it has always been, and I don't know why you can't see that. The room stopped. Shani looked at her. Looked at her fully, at the girl who had been her closest friend in this country, at the thing that had just come out of her mouth like it had been waiting there for a long time. You're wicked, Shani said. Do you know that? You are a wicked friend. Yuna flinched. Then something in her face hardened. And before Shani could read what was coming, her hand moved, fast, flat, the sharp sound of a slap filling the quiet room. Shani's head turned with it. 1 second of absolute stillness. Then she turned back. And she slapped Yuna twice as hard. The sound was not small. Yuna stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with the specific shock of someone who had never in their life had a consequence arrive that fast and that directly. Shani took 1 step toward her. Don't you ever, she said, raise your hand at me again. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. It carried the full weight of every room she had survived that wasn't built for her, every moment she had held her composure when she didn't have to, every time she had stayed quiet when she could have spoken and stayed still when she could have moved. Yuna stared at her. Her hand still pressed to her face. Her eyes doing something Shani had never seen them do, flickering, uncertain, stripped of the composure that usually came as naturally as breathing. Shani stepped back. Go home, Yuna. Yuna went. She found Jae-won in the study that evening and told him about the scholarship without preface. He listened. His expression didn't change, but something in his stillness changed quality, became the particular stillness of someone deciding something. I'll handle it, he said. No, she said. I will. But I need you to tell me who to call. He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. The call she made the following morning was short and precise. She knew what she had and she knew what it was worth, and she communicated both things without excess. The scholarship review was closed by the end of the week. No irregularity found. The donor complaint quietly withdrawn. She told no one how she felt about having to use the leverage of his world to protect something she had built entirely on her own. She wrote it in her journal instead, in the small careful handwriting she had used since she was 12, and then she closed the journal and put it away and moved forward. She told him her decision on a Friday. She would give him access to the key. Full access, the documentation, the encoding, everything her mother had carried for 26 years. On her terms. She sat across from him in the study with a list she had written out by hand, and she went through it item by item without rushing. Her mother, full protection, permanent, untouchable regardless of what the documentation revealed. Her scholarship, clean, secured, no interference from any connected party ever again. Yuna, whatever complicated thing she was not to be destroyed by the fallout. And Shani herself, free to leave, free to return to her life, free to complete her degree and go home to Nairobi when she was done without anyone from this world following her there. He read the list. He did not try to negotiate any of it. Agreed, he said. She looked at him. All of it. Not some of it. All of it. She studied him for a long moment, the way she had studied him from the beginning, with the full attention she gave to things she needed to understand completely. She thought about the kitchen at 2 in the morning. She thought about the journal brought specifically from her desk. She thought about the way he had looked at her across that room before he ever said a word, like he had already seen the end of something. Why did you kiss me, she said. In front of everyone. You could have simply taken me out of the room. You didn't need to do that. He was quiet for longer than usual. No, he said. I didn't need to. She waited. He didn't say more. But his eyes stayed on hers, and the answer was in them if she was willing to read it, which she was, because she had become very good at reading him. She stood. She held out her hand across the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Then he stood and shook it. His hand was warm. She had not expected that, and then she had, because she had been paying attention. She let go and turned toward the door. Shani. She stopped. He almost never used her name. In weeks of conversation he had used it exactly twice, and both times it had landed with a weight that didn't match its 2 syllables. She turned. He was still standing behind the desk. The controlled distance he maintained in every room, with every person, was still there, but something behind it was different. Something that had been sitting behind his eyes for weeks was closer to the surface than she had ever seen it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said nothing. Just looked at her the way he had across the room at the auction, like she was the only fixed point in everything. She held his gaze. Then she turned and walked out. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet and pressed her hands flat against her knees and stayed very still. Outside the window Seoul was moving through its evening. Inside this residence, somewhere down the hall, was a man who had agreed to everything she asked without changing a single condition. She sat there for a long time. She did not open her journal. She already knew what she would write. Yuna messaged her the following morning. She said she was sorry. She said it in 3 different ways across 4 separate messages, each one arriving before the previous one had been answered, which was how Yuna had always communicated when she was uncomfortable, filling silence with more words, hoping volume would do what sincerity couldn't. Shani read all of them. Then she typed her response. She took her time with it because she wanted to say it once and mean every word and never have to say it again. She told Yuna that she had heard her apology. That she understood, on some level, the the pressures of the world Yuna had grown up in and the expectations she carried and how badly she had wanted something she couldn't have. She understood all of that. And it didn't change anything. What Yuna had said in that sitting room, "I will always be above you," was not said in anger. It was not said in a moment of losing control. It came out with the ease of something deeply believed, something that had been sitting comfortably inside her for a long time, something she had never once questioned. That was not a mistake. That was who she was underneath every warm and genuine thing Shani had loved about her. She wrote, "I meant what I said about you being wicked. I don't say things I don't mean. You know that about me." She wrote, "I'm done. Don't contact me again." She sent it. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and got up and washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The grief was there, she didn't pretend it wasn't. 3 years of genuine friendship did not dissolve cleanly just because the ending was necessary. It sat in her chest like something she would have to carry for a while before it got lighter. She was good at carrying things. She got dressed and went downstairs. Jae-won was in the dining room when she came down. He was already working, documents open beside his coffee, phone face up on the table, Soo-ah standing nearby with the composed readiness she maintained at all hours. He looked up when Shani walked in. She sat across from him and poured herself coffee and said nothing. He watched her for a moment. "You're still here." "I am." "Your terms included leaving." "My terms included the option to leave," she said. "I haven't decided yet." Something moved in his expression. She was fluent in his expressions by now, the small shifts that did the work of things other people said out loud. This one was not nothing. Soo-ah quietly gathered her things and left the room. Shani wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him. "You had something to say last night. In the study. You said my name and then you didn't say anything else." He was quiet. "I'd like you to say it now." He looked at her across the table. The morning light was coming through the window behind her and he looked at her in it the way he always looked at her, fully, without managing it. She had never once caught him looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. He looked at her like she was something he had not expected and had not recovered from. He set his phone down. He closed the documents. "When I walked into that room," he said, "I wasn't looking for anything. I came because I had to. I had people watching you for weeks and I knew what you looked like and I knew what I needed and I had a plan." He paused. "Then I saw you." She said nothing. Let him continue. "You were trying to disappear. You were standing in the most dangerous room you had ever been in and you were completely composed and you were watching everything with those eyes that don't miss anything and you were," he stopped. "Started again. You were the most awake person in that room. Everyone else was performing something. You were just there. Fully there. And I forgot the plan." She looked at him. "The kiss," she said, "was not the plan." "I know," she said. "I could tell." Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. "Could you? You're very deliberate. Everything you do is deliberate." "That wasn't." She set her cup down. "It scared you." He didn't deny it. "Yes." "Good," she said. "It scared me too." The room was very quiet. Outside the city was starting its day the way it always did, indifferent and enormous and completely unconcerned with what was happening inside this room. She was aware of that distance and grateful for it. She looked at him. "I'm not easy," she said. "I need you to understand that before anything else. I'm not going to disappear into your world and be grateful for it. I have a degree to finish. I have a mother in Nairobi I call every Sunday. I have a life I built from nothing and I am not putting it down for anyone." "I know," he said. "You say that now." "Shani." His voice was even and certain. "I agreed to your terms without changing a single one. Do you know how many people in my life have ever handed me a list of conditions and watched me sign every one of them?" She held his gaze. "How many?" "You're looking at the full count." She was quiet for a moment. "I want her," she said. He stilled. "That's what you said." She kept her eyes on his. "In that room. In front of everyone." She let a beat pass. I want to say it back. So you know it's equal. So you know I'm not here because of circumstance or because I had nowhere else to go. I'm here because I want to be. He looked at her the way he had from the beginning, like she was the only fixed point in everything, and something in it was different now. The distance that had always lived behind it was gone. Just him, looking at her, without anything in the way. He stood up. He crossed the room and she tipped her face up toward him and he kissed her the way he hadn't kissed her at the auction, not a claim, not a message delivered to a watching room. Just him, and just her, and the particular truth of two people who had spent weeks in the same space learning each other before they ever said the real thing. Her hands were not shaking this time. She enrolled in her morning lecture the following week. The campus looked exactly as it always had, the quad, the library, the building where her economics professor talked too fast and expected everyone to keep up. She had missed 5 weeks and she had work to do and she did it with the same discipline she had always applied to everything that mattered. She still lived in his residence. This had required a conversation with the university's residential office that Suwa had handled with quiet efficiency. Off-campus housing, the paperwork said. The address it listed was technically accurate. Her life had 2 parts now and she moved between them without apology. Mornings on campus, lectures, the library, the table by the window she had defended for 3 years. Evenings in a house that was not small and not simple and contained a man she was still learning, which she expected would take considerably longer than 5 weeks and did not mind. Her mother called on Sunday the way she always did. This time Shani told her everything. Her mother was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then she said, "The necklace. You still have it?" "Yes." "Good." A pause. "Tell me about him." So Shani told her. About the kitchen at 2 in the morning and the ramen. About the journal brought from her desk. About a man who had agreed to every single one of her conditions and meant it. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was not her usual approach, and when Shani was done she made a sound that Shani recognized, the specific sound of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been given permission to set it down. "Be careful," her mother said. "I'm always careful." "Be happy too," her mother said. "You're allowed." Shani sat with that for a moment. "I know, Mama," she said. "I know." She was in the library on a Tuesday afternoon when Jaewon's name appeared on her phone screen. She looked at it for a moment. He rarely called during campus hours, they had an unspoken agreement about that, and picked up. "There's something at the house," he said. "When you're done." "What kind of something?" A pause. "The good kind." She almost smiled. He was not good at this yet, at the small ordinary language of being with someone, the texture of a relationship that wasn't a negotiation or a transaction. He was learning it the way he learned everything, carefully and completely, and she found that she didn't mind watching him figure it out. "I'll be done at 5, she said. "I know," he said. And hung up. She set the phone down and looked at the page in front of her and read the same paragraph 3 times before she gave up and admitted to herself that she was smiling. She closed the book. She started packing up her things. She had until 5. The end.